Greetings, YouTube, and once again I have my faithful penguin mug and my Twinings English breakfast tea. Some of you might remember when I spoke about the Overkill campaign business listing, a psychic service that was available called Alpha. Now, Alpha wasn't just the name of the service. Alpha was the name of the psychic. And Alpha was the ultimate uber psychic in my entire campaign. When I started out that campaign, I was a major X-Men fan, and I loved the character of Professor X, Professor Xavier. So when I decided to come up with my top dog psychic, I decided I would outdo Professor X. Professor X was a paraplegic. I made Alpha a quad. Professor X had some mobility. I took all sensation and mobility away from Alpha. Alpha had only control of her head. Alpha was female. Other than that, the rest of her body was insensate, and immobile. Now, she became important to the group because the group itself did not have a real psychic in it. A number of people had some different mental mutations, but none of them really, could reach out and touch people kind of thing. So when they needed someone, they came to her. So she made multiple occurrences over time, and the players became attached to her as an important NPC in the campaign. Their characters and she began to have a bond. Now it's important, before I continue, remember that one of the characters in this game was my friend Greg, who was playing Niven 7, the super soldier. So, unknown to the characters, Alpha was slowly going insane. The being trapped inside a body when she desperately wanted to be able to move around and interact with the real world in a meaningful manner was driving her nuts. And it got worse when she fell in love with her personal assistant. And the two of them had a deep and abiding relationship, but she could not reciprocate in many ways. She couldn't hug this man, no matter how much she wanted to. So she began to drift towards the shallow end of sanity. And no one really noticed this at first. Well, over the course of a number of adventures, the Overkill group found themselves an exoskeleton. Now, it was a form-fitting suit, very much just like a body condom. And it would allow a person who wore it to move when they themselves were paralyzed. It was totally controlled by mental impulses. It was essentially a medical prosthesis. During the age before the death, it would have been a temporary device. You would have worn it while your nerves were being regrown, or the section of your brain that wasn't functioning was fixed. But those technologies were gone. But it did allow Alpha to now get up and move around. Now she still couldn't feel anything, but she could watch her hands and do things like this. And she taught herself to walk by watching her feet until she got the idea. But she still had to watch the ground when she wanted to walk upstairs and things like that. And this was the last straw. This is what broke the camel's back. This pushed Alpha over the edge because she was so close to being a real woman. But she wasn't. And the players didn't really pick up on the fact that when she started to become kind of harsh, when she went with them on missions now occasionally, and when she met one particular bad guy at one point, she didn't just capture him. She didn't just help apprehend him. She locked him inside a psychic prison forever. Now, he was a bad guy. Don't get me wrong. He deserved to be put in prison, but not necessarily trapped inside his own mind forever. But the players were like, oh, he was a bad guy. They didn't want to think bad of Alpha, so they ignored the signs. Well, a number of missions later, they were out of town on doing something. I think they might even have been on an extra-dimensional mission. I'm not positive. They had a number of those over the course of the campaign. Apparently, I got some weird lighting going on here at the moment. Got really light behind me. Sorry about that. And when they came back from the mission, the town of New Tao, the city of New Tao, was in absolute chaos. It looked like there was a tornado parked right over the city. thousands of people were fleeing, just crawling over themselves trying to get out of the city. Hundreds were already dead. Untold millions of credits worth of damage had already been done. And as they got closer and closer to the center, they had to fight their way through an absolute maelstrom of matter. I mean, vehicles and people's bodies and equipment was being tossed everywhere like twigs. It wasn't just physical winds, there was a psychic storm. When they finally got to the center, there was Alpha. She had constructed an impromptu altar out of some stones, and tied to the top of the altar was some hapless male citizen, unconscious. And she was ranting and raving and speaking in tongues, literally. But the characters, the players and the characters were able to figure out that she was convinced if she could sacrifice this particular individual at a particular time, she would summon an elder god who would finally make her a real woman. That wasn't going to happen. There were no elder gods to summon. And the player characters knew that once she did that, and it didn't work, things were going to get worse. She was going Nova, and she was going to take everybody with her. They didn't know how far this was going to get. So they tried to talk to her. That didn't work, not surprising. And then they realized that we have to take her out. She's our friend, and we love her, but she's got to die, or everybody else is gonna. So they attack her. And when they attacked her, they let go with everything, with mutations, with lasers and powered energy weapons, with conventional firearms. One of the characters used to carry around a 50mm recoilless rifle as a sidearm. None of it touched her. She was completely surrounded in psychic energy and just tearing the world apart. Now, she'd never shown most of the abilities that she had in this moment. They had been awakened in her in the last moments of her sanity. Well, my friend Greg is playing Niven 7, the super soldier. Now, he stops thinking of Alpha as his friend. And he starts seeing her as what she'd become, the enemy. And if there's one thing in the world that Niven 7 was very, very good at, it was about eliminating the enemy. Now, he realized he couldn't touch her. Literally, they couldn't do anything to her. So if you can't harm your enemy, you take away your enemy's goal. At that point, Niven was armed with an automatic shotgun. He loaded it up, flicked it to full auto, and came out behind the cover. And he walked that shotgun from the head of that victim on the altar to his feet. 24 rounds. He turned that man into pink mist. Everything stopped. Alpha just stood there with this slack look of amazement and confusion. She dropped the dagger that had been in her hand. Niven dropped his gun. And he stood up. He started to walk towards her. As he got close, she looked at him and she's like, Niven? What's going on? Now, the storm is still raging above her. There's a calm around them at the moment, but that storm is still there. And Niven says, it's okay, Alpha. It's going to be all right. And he put her in a hug. And as he did this, he slipped a crystal stiletto out of his uniform. All point, no blade. It was made out of a substance that was literally indestructible. And then Greg looked at me and said, I push it into her cerebral cortex. And Alpha died. It was the absolute perfect scene. I couldn't have written it better. I have never seen anything in my gaming career that came together that beautifully in that moment. And Greg and I had never discussed this. We had no previous conversations about this mission whatsoever, this adventure. It's just that Greg and I had known each other since we were 11. And in that moment, the two of us came together in absolute sync. It's one of the greatest gaming moments I ever had. And the players did an excellent job of playing their characters, being remorseful about what they had to do, and about that they had to kill this poor guy, and their best friend is now dead at their hand. And they really played it up. And they made sure she got a proper burial. I believe they actually made sure she was cremated because they knew that she was a pariah now, and that people would probably violate her tomb, or if there was one. She had destroyed, a third of the city. So that was the best thing I ever GM'd in that campaign. It was just beautiful. Goddess, I loved that campaign. It was so much fun. So tell me, or give me a video response, what was one of the best moments you ever had in one of the campaigns that you loved most?